It's been 5 years since London fell. 5 years since the crossed outbreak began. All governments have collapsed, and the military is no more. All that's left is 4 lone men, the last remaining soldiers in all of Great Britain. And they have a radical plan to save the world. They know about a secret weapon which will put the cross down for good. But the question remains, do they actually have what it takes to survive long enough to make it to their ultimate destination? It's uncertain, but all will be revealed in this week's disturbing episode. Hey guys, I'm your host Juan, and today we'll be diving into The Fatal Englishman, also known as issues 25 through 28 of the Badlands anthology series. It's collected here in volume 6 of the cross books if you're a physical collector. But anyway, today's story was written by series creator Garth Ennis, and it features art done by returning artist Raulo Cáceres. But before we get into it, make sure you're subscribed to the channel in order to stay in the loop with all the latest videos. Alrighty then, let's jump right in. Our story opens with a man lying in vibrant, lush grass, staring up at the drifting clouds. His name is Harry, and he is our main protagonist. At the moment, Harry is reflecting on the long and proud history of the country of England. It was England that routed the Spanish Armada under Elizabeth. They were the ones to break Bonaparte at Waterloo, and they were the very same kingdom, in one of the most pivotal epochs of the ages, who defended their own skies against Hitler's Germany during the Second World War. Not a bad record, all things considered. However, all that may as well be ancient history now. It's been half a decade since the crossed outbreak began. The British government is no more, and the military is long gone as well, save for Harry and 3 other men. Together, they are the last remaining soldiers active in all of Great Britain. And so we meet each of them as they decide their next direction. There is Paddy, the guy on the right here, with the gaunt face, who kind of looks like Don Quixote. And then there's Taff, a short and vulgar man, who we get to see taking a shit, I guess. But anyway, heavily contrasted against Taff here is the final member of the crew, a massive red-headed guy named Jock, who has a stoic look on his face. We don't learn much else about these men yet, or why it is that they're roaming around the English countryside, but it is clear that they've known each other for a long, long time. Anyway, sometime later, atop a grassy ridge, the 4 observe through binoculars a pack of 23 crossed, armed to the teeth with a colorful variety of weaponry. But that's not all they see. No. What else they spot may very well be even more shocking. From the angle that they're at, Harry and Paddy also catch sight of a man crouched behind a stone wall, painting red crosses on a group of children's foreheads. In other words, the man is trying to trick the crossed into thinking that they are among them. The soldiers are completely flabbergasted. This is a little maneuver they have seen tried and failed over and over again. And so now, with the infected heading directly toward where the children are hiding, our heroes now face a grim reality. They can stay safe and hidden, but if that happens, they'll also watch as the kids get ripped apart and slaughtered. But truly, a choice like that is not really a choice at all, so they get ready to step in. Meanwhile, the man behind the wall rips the band-aid off and fully commits to the bit. He orders the children to start bellowing out random swear words, like the cross do, but the kids aren't actors, and they're terrified, and they start trembling as the mob charges at them with twisted grins plastered across their faces. Fortunately, though, Harry, Taff, and Paddy have been leopard crawling through the tall grass the entire time, and just as the crossed close in, the 3 erupt from the grass like sprung traps, cutting down the infected in a sudden burst of gunfire. And simultaneously, from the top of the hill, Jock begins sniping some of the monsters as well. So the skirmish ends in a decisive victory, demonstrating high tactical competency on the part of our protagonists. But perhaps the same can't be said for the man originally guarding the kids. Harry leans over the wall, and with a sterile smile on his face, he asks the man if he's some kind of stupid, incompetent imbecile. He then tells the man he can give some food to the children after they wipe the disgusting crosses off their heads. And as the man complies with the order, he explains their backstory to Harry. You see, the children and their guardian were originally part of a survivor group in southeast England. They had a really great spot to hide out from the cross there, but when the outbreak began 5 years ago, these kids were helpless in a nursery school. Their parents never made it back for them, rendering them all orphans. However, their guardian here managed to get them into the survivor hideout, where they remained just until 3 days ago, when the people voted to kick them out. But the man refused to let the poor children, unable to fend for themselves, be abandoned once again, and so he vowed that if they were out, so was he. Harry's expression softens a little, and he comments that this is one point in the stranger's favor. Be that as it may, though, Jock finally determines that there's no nearby infected, so he descends down from the hill. But he's really pissed off, though, and he walks right up to the guardian guy, clenching his hand around the man's neck and lifting him up into the air. Harry calms the big guy down and explains to him that they've already addressed the man's gross recklessness, and he advises him that this entire demonstration is terrifying the children. The stranger falls to the ground, gasping for air and unbuttoning his jacket. Taff is the first one to notice that he is wearing a clerical collar underneath. He's a priest. He introduces himself as Father Dennis Kingston, and he clarifies that it was his own church that they were kicked out of. Harry narrows his eyes at the father and remarks that he never liked the clergy, so that is a point now against the man. We jump now some hours later, well into the night, with our survivors camping out at the edge of the woods, with the children sleeping and the adults taking turns posting sentry. And it is here where the priest and Harry really sit down and have a one-on-one conversation together. Father Kingston asks what the four of them are even doing out here, and if somebody sent them or something. Harry replies that there's no one left to send them, and nowhere to even be sent from. But they are indeed on a mission, one they have assigned to themselves. Their destination is about 150 miles westward, to a place called Porton Down, the home of the government's Biological and Chemical Warfare Center. Harry explains that their plan is to release any biological weapons they find down there in the hopes of exterminating all the crossed in the United Kingdom. The priest just stares at him, wide-eyed and speechless. We jump to 4 days later, where our survivors are watching several dozen crossed march toward the seaside city of Brighton. Strangely, the city seems to have become a kind of hangout center for the infected. And to be quite frank, it's a real horror show. As you can see, it's a utopia for the bloodthirsty maniacs. The crossed are using human skin like papier-mâché to plaster the surface of the pier. The air reeks of rotting flesh, and the beaches are filled with piles of bleached white bones. Needless to say, our protagonists want nothing to do with this place, and they plan to circumvent the town altogether. Right now, they're on the lookout for a functioning boat, because they want the priest to sail the kids out of England to some isolated place like the Channel Islands. The father is apprehensive about this plan, though, but he really has no choice but to go along, because the alternative would be trying to strike it out on his own with the kids in the country. But soon enough it's nighttime once more, a time for conversing between Harry and Father Kingston once again. The priest has had a question burning on his mind for days now, And so he asks Harry if he's actually thought through the consequences of his plan to release a bioweapon. Harry affirms that yes, he knows that the Crossed will be wiped off the map, as they have absolutely zero sense of self-preservation. In his words, if they die of the cold, they'll die of the plague. But the father reflexively protests this, pointing out that so too will all the rest of the survivors left in the UK. Harry quickly responds, claiming that their 4-person military unit here has come across several well-organized groups scattered across the country, some even with radios and protection suits. And so, before they release any biological agent or disease, they'll make sure to send a radio broadcast warning people beforehand. Hopefully, the survivors will escape or reach a higher ground, but yes, some will be killed, sadly. But the fact of the matter is that there are only a roughly estimated 50,000 people left in all of Great Britain, and about 19 times as many crossed. So they have to act fast and take such decisive action, because the grim reality is that there are just too many infected and not enough resources for humanity to make it in the long haul. They will lose, and it's just a matter of time. So the only play left is the radical one that will shake up the entire board. Harry continues on, explaining that the dream is that once Britain is cleansed of the infected, because it is an island nation, historically difficult to invade, well, the hope is that the country will become the new headquarters of sorts for humanity, a place for them to concentrate themselves, and from which to launch offensive campaigns against the Crossed, just like the Armada, just like Waterloo. First they'll liberate the rest of Europe, and then the rest of the world. The priest cannot believe a word of what he's hearing, so he challenges Harry and demands to know if he thinks he's some kind of hero who's going to lead a crusade that saves the world. Harry laughs to himself and replies that no, he and the boys have no protection suits. They'll be dead the moment they press the button and release the weapon. And with that, the two sit on in silence. The next morning, as Jock feeds the children, Father Kingston decides to strike up a conversation with Paddy. He asks the soldier if he or the others are Christians, and he pulls out a Bible. Paddy scoffs, but the priest continues on. He says that he is there to be a helping hand and a shoulder to lean on, and that he'll even hear their confession if that will help them ease their souls. Paddy turns to face the man, and he sharply retorts that the priest has no idea who they are or what they've seen. He tells the father to back off and that nobody's interested. But the cleric keeps pressing, and Paddy loses his cool. He begins shouting that he used to be a Catholic, but he lost his faith after growing tired of the Lord's supposed mysterious ways. He then asserts that the church preys on and exploits people's fears, and that, further, the clergy were the original Crossed, as they were the ones who raped little kids. But before things can escalate any further, Harry steps in and tells them both to get a move on because they need to get ready to go. And so the survivors begin walking along the idyllic coast once again. Harry looks over at Father Kingston and snidely remarks that he must not have had luck converting him then, huh? The priest calls him an arrogant man and sadly bows his head. But as the wind picks up, Harry finds himself somewhere else. He starts to reflect on his life, and he slips into a flashback that takes us back to the onset of the Crossed outbreak. We see our protagonist racing his car down the country roads, trying to get to his home as quickly as possible. The radio stations are all blasting emergency warnings, but Harry already knows what's going on. He is on the phone with his wife, Julie, who is home alone with her young son and infant daughter. He yells into the phone that she needs to cut off all outside contact and to immediately hide. But it's too late. She informs Harry that there's already a horde of slobbering maniacs trying to claw down the front door. Harry tries to remain calm, but he is absolutely starting to panic. He tells Julie to go out the back door right away and begins sprinting as hard as she can to the road. And with that, our man slams the brakes and stops the car and begins crawling underneath the barbed wire. Things are not looking good, though. His family is running for their lives. However, his wife is carrying their daughter, and his son is small. So their speed is just not quick enough, and the Crossed are gaining on them. Harry begins shooting the infected from across the field, careful not to hit his family. But in the blink of an eye, it's all over. Julie ends up tripping, and she falls down. And what happens next is truly horrifying, and undoubtedly one of the most brutal moments in the entire series. The Crossed jubilantly get their hands all over Julie, gouging out her eye and biting off her ear. But worse than that, the monsters snatch onto the little girl's legs, and they start savagely heaving the baby out of her mother's arms. All we can really do is hope that their pain was short-lived, because it appears that Harry puts his wife and child out of misery by shooting them in the head. But our focus is immediately redirected to Harry's son now, the last person he has left. But his son is kneeled down in the grass for some reason, and he stopped moving. His father screams at him, begging him to get up and start running. But the lad just sits there crying. He's given up, and he just wants it all to be over. And so it seems that Harry puts him down as well. All that's left now is a sobbing father, and the demons who have just destroyed his life. But something snapped in Harry in that moment on that day, and he retreated into what was familiar, robotically reloading his weapon and continuing on the fight, a fight in a world ignorant to the cruel tragedy that just befell him. And so that brings us back into the present day now. A few more days have passed, and the survivors are on the outskirts of what seems like a long deserted town. They have finally found a boat from which to send off Father Kingston and the kids, but before they can get too excited, Jock firmly says one word: contact, presaging the fleshy mass of infected folk hurtling themselves at our heroes. There's a lot of them, and not a lot of distance, and everyone can feel that this may very well be the end. So Harry hands a loaded gun to the priest, telling him that if it comes to it, he has to shoot the children and then himself. He then cocks his weapon and joins his men in the heart of the fray. Like I said, this is going to be a tight one, and Harry cools his nerves by thinking of his ancestors, all of them deeply embedded in the glorious victories of England's history. His lineage fought on the battlefields. They were there during the Norman invasion. They were there through the long 100 Years' War. They were there during the English Civil War for the Crown, and they were there for the people during the First and Second World Wars. And now, all his warrior relatives are looking down on him with smiles as he fights for his country in one last campaign. But perhaps, ultimately, the outcomes of these endeavors are left up to the fates. And right now, unfortunately, Jock's gun has become jammed, so he lifts the top cover up and works on clearing out the feed tray. He does all this with a calm and determined look, which is in heavy contrast to the priest, who starts freaking out, screaming that the Crossed are feet away now, and that he isn't strong enough to do what they're asking him. But then the right thing clicks, and in the nick of time, Jock's weapon becomes functional, and they continue their onslaught with no time to spare. Soon enough, the hillside is littered with packed, naked corpses, and the crew diligently makes sure each is truly dead. One of the kids cannot help but stare up at Jock in awe, and the big man, with a glint in his eyes, smiles back at him. When the coast is clear, the men walk the docks and secure the boat, and it is decided that the very next morning they'll send Father Kingston and the children away to the Channel Islands with enough supplies to get them started. The idea, of course, being that any crossed on the smaller islands likely died a long time ago from starvation. Anyway, soon enough the sun sets, and it's a time for quiet and introspection. The priest can't help himself. He feels an irresistible urge to have one final talk with Harry before they part ways forever. So he sits across the table from the soldier, who's playing cards, and what follows is one long conversation between the two men. The father is worried that he is ill-suited and unprepared to be the one to sail the children away and protect them. He's scared that he'll fail them. Without hesitation, Harry questions if he's also scared of finding out that there's no God after all. The priest pauses and asks the military man if this is all some kind of joke to him. He then gets down to business and puts forward the question he really came here to ask. When was the moment that Harry decided to pursue his mission? Harry thinks for a moment, and then he carefully responds, saying that it wasn't any one particular atrocity that sent him down this path of total annihilation. No, he knew what he had to do after studying the enemy for a while and realizing the simple fact that there's more of them than us. Further, the Crossed have no restraint and a limitless will, a will completely dedicated toward destruction and pain. And Paddy, Jock, and Taff concurred with this assessment, and so they resolved themselves to extirpating the infected from the country, whatever means necessary. The priest raises his head and meekly asks Harry if he thinks that God was the one who sent the cross to Earth. The soldier shakes his head no. The cross-shaped rashes on their faces are just a coincidence. Jews are not hunted by the starred, and Muslims are not attacked by people with crescent moons on their heads. This, of course, being meta-commentary by Garth Ennis. But anyway, Harry continues. He says that rather than the cross being the work of a divine power, they are instead the natural expression of human faith and belief in a divine power. Father Kingston is obviously upset and incredulous about this, but Harry presses on. He brings up what Paddy said earlier, that the religious were the crossed before the crossed. In his view, there is a kind of fanaticism inherent to religion that has perpetuated, condoned, encouraged, and institutionalized acts of violence and cruelty throughout human history. So when Harry looks at the crossed, he sees the religious impulse taken to its ultimate end, the final form of an absolute devotion, in his own words. The father sighs and delivers a counter-argument. Harry ascribes a lot of crimes and blame to the church, but he is in fact a British soldier, and British soldiers, the priest points out, have served the largest empire in human history, one that has brutally conquered and subjugated a full quarter of the planet. And who's to say that the instincts of the crossed don't have roots in militarism and jingoism rather than, say, religiosity? Harry laughs this thought off, though, and he offers a deflection and a weak defense. He faintly implies that the worst offenses of the Empire were actually driven by profit, which is a hollow and nonsensical way to evade culpability. But Harry further contends that while the British Empire did do some bad, they also did some good, and that further, if they didn't step in and take over, someone else was going to anyway, which is an incomplete justification, since in order to complete the argument, one would need to demonstrate that intervention would be less harmful than the alternative. But this is besides the point, because none of it is what the priest was even arguing anyway. Harry keeps going on, though. He argues that the Empire faded away and no longer exists, so it's completely irrelevant to bring it up. However, the church? Well, the church still lives on. And this is a weak argument because if the behavior of the crossed is rooted in the same behavior behind imperialism, its modern-day status is the actually irrelevant detail. Further, Harry makes a categorical error here. You see, an empire is a political arrangement, dependent on the caprices of government, while the church is first and foremost a social and cultural institution. So, Harry is kind of dishonest when he hides behind the non-existence of the empire, when the church is also at its lowest point in influence and power, which is functionally equivalent. Regardless, Harry attacks Catholicism some more, mentioning the Vatican's accommodations and neutrality toward Hitler, as well as bringing up some accusations that they were the ones who helped Nazis escape to South America and all that. Father Kingston cuts him off, and he says that God was the one who told them to protect the children when everyone else was ready to abandon them. And he says that his good word outweighs all the abuses perpetuated by others in his name. Harry jumps on this, and he asserts that helping children is obvious and is already inherently the right thing to do, implying that moral choice is intuitive and doesn't require any transcendent impositions, which is philosophically tenuous, as you are basically saying what's right is what's right, with no further justification or nuance provided. But anyway, Harry makes his final argument to Father Kingston. He says that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't God that led the priest to protect the kids. Maybe he's just fundamentally a good man who would have always made that choice, with or without God or faith. And with that thought, the two men retire for the night, and despite knowing that they'll never agree with one another, they at least recognize and understand each other to some extent. And that's gotta mean something, right? The next morning, the father is awoken by the children who are surrounding him. They inform the priest that the 4 soldiers gave them breakfast and departed, urging the kids to let him sleep on undisturbed. So the father begins gathering his belongings so they may begin their journey to the island, but he is unable to find his rosary at first. And then he looks at the table and shakes his head. And so the issue ends with us seeing the final mocking gesture Harry left behind for Father Kingston. The father mutters that he was the strangest man, and with that, they depart England for the last time.
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. While I have you, I might as well let you know about my YouTube membership program. You see, for just $1.99 a month, you can support the channel and get access to a special loyalty badge next to your name, videos a bit early, and a set of exclusive community emojis. I quite like the smiling cross guy one, personally. Just a little goes a long way in helping create more videos, so I thank you for the consideration. But enough with that, let's get back to the video.
Alright, we're back, and we pick up again with Harry, Taff, Patty, and Jock traversing the abandoned motorways. They are finally closing in on the biological warfare facility in Portendown. Unfortunately, this mission isn't going to be easy, as the group observes at least 100 crossed scattered about the area through their binoculars. But as the crew is discussing the best way to break into the facility, a bus behind them starts shaking, and 2 crossed ladies, who I definitely can't show, pop out. You'll have to take my word for it, but one of them basically has dreadlocks made out of severed penises. Anyway, our heroes decide to YOLO it, giving out a war cry and sprinting toward the entrance. Crossed from all directions start to close in on them, but apparently Harry knows about a secret entrance beneath the disabled parking spot. He hurriedly punches a code in a panel, and then a trap door in the concrete opens up. The soldiers dive inside, and they pull the door shut behind them at the last possible second. They wipe the sweat off their brows and catch their breaths, and Jock half-jokingly remarks that he's glad this is all ending because he doesn't think he's got that much left in him. And so it doesn't take long for our protagonists to find the biological weapons they traveled all across the country in pursuit of. However, as Harry starts discussing the practical tactics of releasing the viral agents, he is met with a stark and awkward silence, and none of the other men will even look at him. Harry smirks and says that it seems they have reached some kind of consensus on their own. You see, Patty, Jock, and Taff have gotten cold feet now that the moment has actually come. Sure, the disease they release will kill the crossed, but it will also kill every other normal person still trying to survive in Great Britain. And they know, as well as Harry does, that he lied to the priest when he told him that they had come across groups with radios and protection suits. In truth, there were only a handful with either, and certainly none with both. Taft chimes in, saying that he wants to give the other survivors a better chance of making it, and he pointedly asks Harry if he's had enough yet. He and all the rest of the men in the room have fought in this righteous war, and they have done so valiantly and with honor. But maybe now it's time for the war to end. Jock picks up the thread next and speaks up, suggesting that they could use C4 to blow up the entrances so the Cross can never use the weapons themselves, and they can go out the alternative exit and take as many of the monsters down as they can in a kind of last stand of sorts. Harry looks at the three of them one by one and calmly acquiesces. He then opens up the door and gestures for his comrades to go on first. But as the four of them are walking through the corridor, Harry gets to thinking. He's been to hell and back with these men, and the bond they share is hard to quantify. It's a friendship impossible to measure, and a brotherhood in arms. A relationship where you fully put your life and your faith into the hands of another, and believe in them like no other, and they do the same to you. How do you explain that? The answer is you can't really. But all Harry really needs to know in this moment is that he loves each of them. Taff, Jock, and Patty. They've never once let him down, and now so shouldn't Harry. The thought of watching them get ripped apart or defiled turns his blood cold. And the profane idea that these great and honorable men could actually themselves become infected, well, that sends Harry into a frenzy. And with that, in one swift and deliberate movement, Harry raises his weapon, and he fires 3 shots into the back of his brothers' heads. Their bodies crumple to the floor, and the loud sound rings through the bunker. With an expressionless face, Harry completes the mission and plants the C4, climbing out of the alternative exit. As he emerges, he realizes that he never should have thought he had the right to release a bioweapon in the first place. It was never his place to condemn thousands. He takes a deep breath and thinks to himself that I have no faith, but yet in the strangest way, in this very moment, perhaps I do. And with that, an earnest smile grows on Harry's face, and the man feels no fear as he prepares for what will be his final act. The pavement seems to rumble as hundreds of feet strike the ground in unison, all converging on the soldier who now stands ready to face whatever comes next. And thus so concludes the story of the fatal Englishman.
Well, that was a surprisingly emotional ending. But what did you guys think of today's story? Was it a hit or was it a miss for you? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section, and also make sure to like and subscribe when you're at it. Next time, we're going to rewind to the onset of the Crossed Outbreak in a sort of prequel that features the same 4 men, and you're not going to want to miss it. But anyway, let's dive into some analysis here.
Right. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any Garth Ennis interview regarding this story, but that's all right. I think we've got enough to make it on our own. Yeah, I'll start by sharing my own opinion on The Fatal Englishman. In short, I liked it. It was thematically rich and well told, blending, great action with genuine emotional beats. And say what you will about Garth Ennis, he definitely knows how to tell a story. That said, I could definitely understand the perspective of those who might not like the story as much as I did. Because, well, more than usual, it felt like a vehicle for Ennis's social commentary. Right. And to that end, what we get in The Fatal Englishman is large doses of some of his favorite pet topics, namely atheism. And this aspect of his works routinely rub readers the wrong way. And I will say that this aspect of the story certainly dates it a little bit. I get strong new atheism vibes every time I see stuff like this. And, well, frankly, the height and momentum of that movement has come and gone. Yeah. But nevertheless, I do gotta praise the ambition of Ennis in regard to including that extended conversation between Harry and the priest. It was rather mature and smart, but obviously it was also kind of one-sided, which prompted me to step in there myself. I'm sure much to the annoyance of some people. But I just think it would have been a little bit wild to just let some of that stuff hang unchallenged. So, I mean, I don't really have a stake in this particular case either way. I really was just trying to present some balance, but, whatever. So, shifting gears, I'll end my writing commentary by saying that I also thought the national identity stuff from the story was pretty interesting. That is to say, a soldier basically clinging onto the idea of his country. Because in one respect, he's doing it because he lost his family and has nothing left. But in another respect, he sort of conceptualizes the war against the crossed as within the continuity of his nation's history, despite that state technically not even existing anymore. It kind of opens the door to a lot of deeper questions. I mean, was Harry just coping by desperately clinging onto that? Or, I mean, even if he was, would that even be a bad thing? I mean, if that's the thing that animates him and keeps him going, I mean, but even beyond that, like, what does it mean if a nation can live on in others while being stripped of all tangible or practical manifestations? And I don't know. Perhaps people create the state, and then the state creates a way of being, a sort of tradition that can be imbibed. It's really hard to say, but I'll leave it at that for now. Yeah. So I guess I'll finish this video off by commending Raulo Cáceres' art. It looks excellent, and I love it. He's a very creative dude. I think some people misunderstood me the last time we saw his work in Cross Psychopath. My criticism, so far as it was one, was that sometimes his stuff can look a little bit busy, so to speak. But anyway, that about does it with today's episode. I want you guys to stay safe and sharp out there, alright? Alright. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good one.